Hi, Leo. Good afternoon, and welcome to your reading. This reading already has my full attention, and honestly, this feels like a really important message. Let's see what the cards have to say. You did something, and I don't think you fully understand what it set in motion. You might think you do. You might have a version of events in your head that feels complete, a version where you made a choice and the choice had consequences and the consequences were proportional and contained and limited to the immediate situation. But that version is wrong. Not because the facts are incorrect, but because the scale is off. What you did, the thing you said, or the boundary you drew, or the decision you made, or the silence you chose, or the door you walked through, or the door you refused to walk through, whatever it was, it didn't just affect the situation. It detonated the foundation of someone's entire world. And they are standing right now in the rubble of an existence that, until you did what you did, felt stable and predictable and under their control. It doesn't feel that way anymore because of you. Specifically, precisely, undeniably because of you. And the most disorienting part for them, the part that they keep circling back to in their mind with a bewilderment that borders on vertigo, is that they never saw it coming. Not from you, from anyone else maybe, but not from you. You were the last person on earth they expected this from. And the fact that it came from you, from the one person they thought they could predict, the one person they believed they had figured out, the one person whose behavior they felt confident enough to take for granted, that fact has shattered something in them that goes far deeper than the event itself. It has shattered their ability to trust their own judgment. Because if they were wrong about you, what else are they wrong about? And that question is eating them alive. Let me slow down and go back to the beginning, because I think the origin point matters, and I think you've been so focused on the aftermath that you've lost sight of what actually started this. There was a version of you that this person believed in, not the real you. A version, a construct, an interpretation of you that they built over time, piece by piece, interaction by interaction, based not on who you actually are, but on who they needed you to be. And the version they built was comfortable, manageable, safe. In their version, you were the one who would always accommodate, the one who would bend, the one who would absorb the impact of their choices without complaint and continue showing up with the same steady, reliable, almost frustratingly consistent energy that they had come to depend on, the way a person depends on gravity, without gratitude, without acknowledgement, without even the basic awareness that what they were depending on was not guaranteed. They built an entire life on the assumption of your compliance, not consciously, not with the deliberate intention of exploiting you. More like the way someone builds a house on a piece of land without checking whether the land is stable. They just assumed it was because it had always been, because the ground had never shifted before. Because you had given them no reason across the entire history of your connection to believe that the ground would ever shift. And so they built expectations on top of your reliability. They built plans on top of your flexibility. They built an identity on top of their ability to predict and control your behavior. And the structure they erected was elaborate and extensive and deeply integrated into the mechanics of their daily existence. And then you moved, the ground moved, and everything they built on top of it came crashing down. I want to talk about what you did, and I want to do it without judgment, because I think you've been judging yourself enough, and I think some of that judgment is misplaced. What you did was not cruel. It might have felt cruel in the execution. It might have looked cruel from the outside. The person on the receiving end is certainly interpreting it as cruel, or at least as shocking and unfair and disproportionate to whatever they believe provoked it. But cruelty requires the intention to harm. And what I can feel in your energy is not an intention to harm. What I can feel is something far more complex and far more human than cruelty. I can feel exhaustion, the specific terminal exhaustion of a person who reached the end of a very long rope and discovered in the reaching that there was no more rope to give. You didn't snap. That's not the right word. You arrived at a place that had been approaching for a long time, a place where the cost of continuing to be the version of yourself that this person depended on finally exceeded the cost of stopping. And so you stopped. Not dramatically, not with the explosive energy of someone who's been suppressing rage. With the quiet, almost eerie calm of someone who has simply, completely, irreversibly run out of the willingness to pretend that what they've been giving is sustainable. And the quietness of it is part of what shocked them so deeply. They were prepared for drama. Their defense systems are calibrated for confrontation, for arguments, for the kind of emotional eruptions that can be managed and deflected and eventually smoothed over with the right combination of apologies and promises and temporary behavioral adjustments. They know how to handle a fight. They've handled plenty of them. What they don't know how to handle is what you gave them instead, which was nothing. Not the nothing of absence, the nothing of completion, the nothing that a person offers when they've said everything they have to say and the well is dry and the performance is over and there is no anger left because anger requires investment and you have divested entirely. That nothing is more frightening than any confrontation could ever be, because a fight implies connection. A fight means you still care enough to engage. But the nothing, the calm, complete, unmistakable nothing, that means you've crossed a line that has no return crossing. And they can feel that. They can feel the permanence in what you did. And the permanence is what's causing the earthquake. Now, I want to go somewhere that might be uncomfortable for you because I think there's a part of this you haven't fully examined. You knew this would hurt them. Not in the sadistic, I want them to suffer way. In the clear-eyed, I understand the consequences and I'm choosing this anyway way. You knew that what you were about to do would cause disruption. You knew the version of you they depended on was load-bearing, and removing it would collapse things. And you did it anyway. And the fact that you did it anyway, knowing the impact, knowing the cost, knowing the hurt, is something you've been sitting with in the quiet of your own conscience, turning it over, examining it for evidence of selfishness or malice, wondering whether the justified feeling you carried during the act was genuine justification or self-serving rationalization dressed up as empowerment. I want to put that internal trial to rest. What you did was not selfish. Selfishness is the prioritization of your own comfort at the expense of someone else's well-being. What you did was the prioritization of your own survival at the expense of someone else's comfort. And those are two fundamentally different things. You were not choosing luxury over their need. You were choosing oxygen. You were choosing the basic, non-negotiable, essential requirement of being able to exist inside your own life without the constant hemorrhage of energy required to maintain a role that was slowly, systematically, almost imperceptibly killing the person underneath it. You didn't leave someone stranded for your own amusement. You stopped drowning so that someone else could continue floating on your body. The fact that your body was the raft they were using doesn't make you obligated to keep sinking. But I also want to honor the complexity of what you're feeling, because I don't think it's simple, and I don't think it should be reduced to a simple narrative of empowerment versus guilt. There is grief in you. Real, legitimate, uncomplicated grief for the pain you caused. Not guilt, grief. Guilt says I did something wrong. Grief says I did something necessary that hurt someone I care about, and the necessity doesn't erase the hurt, and the hurt doesn't invalidate the necessity, and I have to hold both of those truths simultaneously, and the holding is heavy. That's where you are, in the heavy holding. And I want you to know that the heaviness is not a sign that you made the wrong choice. It's a sign that you made a real one. Easy choices don't generate grief. Only the choices that cost something generate grief. And the cost of what you did is the knowledge that your liberation came at the price of someone else's stability. That's a real cost. You don't have to pretend it isn't. You just have to be clear with yourself and with the universe that the cost was one you were willing to pay, because the alternative was a different kind of cost, slower and less visible, but ultimately more devastating. The cost of losing yourself entirely inside a role that was never meant to be permanent. Let me turn now to what's actually happening inside the person whose life you've shaken, because I think you need to see it, not to feel guilty, not to feel validated, to understand, because understanding is the only thing that prevents this situation from calcifying into a narrative of heroes and villains, and the truth is too nuanced for that framework. The truth requires you to hold this person's pain alongside your own liberation and see both as valid, both as real, both as deserving of compassion. This person is in shock, genuine, physiological, cognitive shock. Their brain is doing the thing that brains do when the model of reality they've been operating on is suddenly invalidated. It's cycling, running the same loop over and over, replaying the moment it happened, examining every detail, every word, every microexpression, every tonal shift, searching desperately for the warning signs it missed. Because if there were warning signs, if the earthquake was preceded by tremors that they should have detected, then the world is still predictable, still knowable, still safe in the way that it's safe when the rules make sense and people behave according to established patterns. But if there were no warning signs, if you truly did this without precedent, if the you they thought they knew is simply not the you that exists, then the world is not safe. The rules don't work. And the model of reality that they've been navigating by is revealed as a fiction, and they're suddenly standing in a real world they don't have a map for. They keep coming back to the phrase, "I never expected this from you." And I want to unpack that phrase because there's an entire worldview embedded in it that reveals more about them than they realize. I never expected this from you means I had expectations of you. Specific ones, detailed ones, expectations that were not negotiated or agreed upon, but unilaterally installed, based not on who you told them you were, but on who they decided you were based on your behavior. And your behavior, your long, consistent, reliable, accommodating behavior, gave them every reason to believe that their expectations were accurate. You taught them through repetition that you were the person who absorbs, the person who adjusts, the person who shows up regardless. And they learned the lesson you taught them. They learned it so well that they stopped considering the possibility that the lesson might have an expiration date, that the person teaching it might one day decide to revise the curriculum. What they're experiencing now is the dissonance between the you they constructed and the you that actually exists. And that dissonance is profound. It's not just surprise. It's identity crisis. because their relationship with you was one of the pillars of their self-concept. They knew who they were in relation to you. They knew their role, their position, their power, their leverage. They knew the rules of the game. And now the game has changed without their consent, and they don't know the new rules, and the old rule doesn't apply, and the power they held, which was never really power, but the illusion of power created by your willingness to let them believe they had it, that power has evaporated overnight. And the evaporation has left them not just destabilized, but existentially dislocated. They don't just not know what to do, they don't know who to be. The version of themselves that existed in relation to the version of you they believed in, that version of themselves is now homeless, wandering the ruins of a dynamic they thought was permanent, picking through the wreckage for something familiar, something they can rebuild from, something that tells them the world still works the way they thought it did. There's anger in them. I want to be honest about that. The anger is hot and bright, and it's directed at you with a specificity that might alarm you if you could see it. They feel betrayed, not in the way someone feels betrayed by an enemy, in the way someone feels betrayed by an ally, by a safe person, by the one person they were sure would never do this. And the anger has a quality of righteousness to it that's going to be difficult for you to hear about, because it implies that what you did was wrong. And I've just spent several paragraphs telling you it wasn't. But here's the thing about anger in the wake of an earthquake. It's not really about right and wrong. It's about fear. Anger is what fear looks like when it puts on armor. And this person is terrified, not of you, of the implications. If you could change, if you could go from predictable to unpredictable overnight, if the ground they were standing on could liquefy without warning, then nothing is solid, nothing is reliable. The world is not the stable, manageable, controllable place they organized their entire life around believing it was. And that terror is so overwhelming that the only way their system knows how to process it is to convert it into anger and aim it at the nearest target, which is you. The anger will pass. Not quickly, not cleanly, but it will pass. What won't pass, what will remain, long after the anger has burned through its fuel and left behind the quiet, ashen landscape of a person who has run out of outrage, is the deeper emotion. The one underneath the anger, the one that the anger was protecting them from feeling because feeling it requires a vulnerability that they're not yet capable of. And that deeper emotion is grief. Their own version of the grief I described in you. Grief for the loss of something they didn't know was fragile until it broke. Grief for the version of you that doesn't exist anymore. The version that was partially real and partially fabricated, but that they loved regardless. The version that made them feel safe in a way that nothing else did. They're going to grieve that version of you the way someone grieves a death, because in a very real sense, that version did die. You killed it gently necessarily, but completely. And the person left standing in its place, the real you, the full you, the you that has boundaries and breaking points and the capacity to choose yourself, even when choosing yourself inconveniences. Someone who depended on you not to, that person is a stranger to them. And being confronted with a stranger where a safe person used to be is one of the loneliest feelings in the human emotional repertoire. I want to talk now about something I'm picking up in the energy that adds a layer of complexity to this whole situation. There's a third element here that neither you nor the other person has fully acknowledged. It's the thing that actually caused you to move, the catalyst, because you didn't do this in a vacuum. Something happened, something recent, something that might have seemed small in isolation, but that landed on the exact spot where your endurance was thinnest. A comment, a request, an assumption made about your time, your energy, your willingness, your availability. Something that in the long history of things this person has said or done was probably not even in the top 50 in terms of severity. But it landed on the wrong day, in the wrong moment, on a surface that had been worn so thin by years of accumulated weight that this one additional ounce, this one final grain, was enough to break through. And that's what makes it so confusing for them, because from their perspective, the catalyst was nothing. It was ordinary. It was the kind of thing they've said or done 100 times before without consequence. So when the earthquake hit, when you finally moved, they looked at the catalyst and looked at the response, and the disproportion made no sense. They're thinking, I said one thing and you blew up our entire dynamic. How is that fair? How is that proportional? How can you justify this level of disruption over something so small? And they're right that the catalyst was small. What they don't see, what they have never been willing to see, is that the catalyst was not the cause. The catalyst was the last in a series of 1,000 causes, each one individually manageable, each one absorbed and processed and forgiven and folded into the ongoing project of maintaining the relationship. The earthquake wasn't caused by one tremor. It was caused by 1,000 tremors that were individually too small to register on their awareness, but that collectively weakened the fault line until the fault line could no longer hold. You tried to tell them. This is the part that I think is hardest for you, the part that generates the most frustration when you look back at the history of this connection. You tried. Maybe not in the explicit sit down, we need to talk way that communication advice columns recommend, but in your way, in the ways that were available to you given the dynamic. You dropped hints, you expressed discomfort in indirect ways. You showed through shifts in your energy, your enthusiasm, your availability that something was off. You gave them the emotional equivalent of a check engine light, and they drove right past it again and again and again. Not because they're stupid, because the narrative they'd built about you didn't include the possibility of a check engine light. In their model, you didn't have an engine that could break down. You were perpetual motion, self-sustaining, maintenance-free. And so the signals you sent were filtered through a model that couldn't accommodate them, and the model won, and the signals were dismissed. And the engine kept running on fumes until the fumes ran out and the engine stopped. And the silence that followed was the most eloquent communication you ever made, because it was the one they couldn't dismiss. Let me tell you something about the aftermath that's unfolding right now, because the energy is very active, and I think you need to see the full scope of what your action set in motion. This person is not just processing an emotional event. They are undergoing a forced reorganization of their entire relational framework, because you were not the only person in their life they had this dynamic with. You were the template, the original model, the prototype for a pattern of relating that they replicated across multiple connections, the way they treated you, the assumptions they made about your limitless capacity, the unconscious entitlement to your energy and your accommodation. That wasn't unique to you. That was their style, their default mode of connecting. And when you shattered the template, the shockwaves didn't just affect your relationship, they traveled through the network. They reached every other connection that was built on the same assumptions, the same entitlements, the same unconscious belief that other people's compliance is permanent and unconditional and can be withdrawn from indefinitely without ever depleting the account. Other people in their life are going to feel the effects of what you did, not directly, indirectly. Because this person, shaken by your unexpected earthquake, is now looking at every other relationship through the lens of, what if they do it too? What if the other people I take for granted also have breaking points I can't see? What if the ground I'm standing on in every area of my life is just as unstable as the ground that collapsed beneath me when this person moved? That paranoia, if you can call it that, is actually the beginning of awareness. It's the crack in the door of a consciousness that was previously sealed shut against the possibility that other people are not extensions of your will, but autonomous beings with their own limits and their own rights and their own irreducible humanity that exists independently of your narrative about them. You started something. What you did wasn't just an act of personal liberation. It was an act of disruption in a system that needed to be disrupted. And the disruption, as painful as it is for everyone involved, is doing something that years of subtle communication and gentle boundary setting couldn't accomplish. It's making this person see not everything, not yet, but the first layer, the outermost shell of an awareness that, if they're willing to follow it inward, leads to a profound reckoning with the way they've been showing up in relationships for their entire adult life. Now, I want to come back to you because there's something happening in your energy that I want to address, and I think it's a critical piece of your journey right now. You're in a strange emotional territory, a territory that doesn't have a name. It's not relief, although there are elements of relief in it. It's not triumph, although there's a faint undercurrent of something that resembles satisfaction. It's not guilt, although the guilt keeps trying to move in. It's something else. Something that feels like standing in a room that you just emptied of all its furniture. The room is yours. You chose to empty it. You needed to empty it. The furniture was suffocating you. But now that it's gone, the room is so bare and so echoey and so unfamiliarly open that you don't quite know what to do with yourself inside it. You keep walking to the spots where the furniture used to be and reaching for things that aren't there anymore. Habits of accommodation, reflexes of caretaking, the automatic impulse to check on this person, to smooth things over, to manage their emotional response to your action, the way you've been managing their emotional responses for as long as you can remember. Those impulses are going to persist for a while. They're not signs that you made the wrong choice. They're the phantom limb sensations of an amputated dynamic. You cut something off. Something that was alive and connected and deeply integrated into your neural pathways. And the brain doesn't immediately update its wiring to reflect the new reality. It keeps sending signals to the missing limb. Keep reaching for the absent furniture. It takes time for the internal map to match the external landscape. Be patient with yourself during this recalibration. You might catch yourself halfway through composing a conciliatory message before you remember that conciliation is no longer your job. You might feel a surge of anxiety when you think about what this person is feeling before you remember that their feelings, while valid, are not your responsibility to manage. You might wake up in the middle of the night with a lurching, panicky sensation that you've done something terrible before your waking mind catches up and reminds you that what you did was necessary. These are echoes. They're the reverberations of a pattern that was so deeply established that its removal creates a kind of ringing in the emotional ears. The ringing will fade. Give it time. There's something I want to illuminate about the specific power dynamic that existed between you and this person, because I think seeing it clearly will help you resist the gravitational pull of the old pattern. The dynamic was built on an unspoken contract, not a mutual agreement. A unilateral contract that this person drafted and you signed through your behavior, through your compliance, through your repeated demonstration that you would absorb whatever was handed to you and keep showing up. The terms of this contract were never spoken because speaking them would have revealed their absurdity. The terms essentially said, I get to be inconsistent and you have to be consistent. I get to have bad days and you have to accommodate them. I get to prioritize my needs and you have to deprioritize yours. I get to change the rules and you have to follow them. I get to take and you have to give. And if you ever stop giving, you are the one who broke the contract. Read that last line again. If you ever stop giving, you are the one who broke the contract. That's the logic this person is operating on right now. That's why they feel betrayed. In their mind, you violated an agreement. You broke a promise. You disrupted a system that was working. The fact that the system was only working for them, that the system was sustained entirely by your willingness to operate at a deficit, that the agreement was never actually agreed to but merely assumed based on your pattern of compliance, none of that registers for them yet. It will eventually, if they're willing to look at it honestly. But right now, in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake, they are firmly positioned as the victim of your unprovoked disruption. And the narrative they're constructing casts you as the person who shattered something beautiful for no reason. You know the reason. You don't owe them the reason again. You've given the reason. In 100 different ways, in 100 different moments, through 100 different signals that they chose not to receive. The reason is not new information. The reason is information they declined to process when processing it would have been inconvenient. And now, faced with the consequence of their own selective attention, they're rewriting history to position themselves as the blind-sided innocent rather than the willfully unseeing participant. That rewrite is their defense mechanism. It's how they protect themselves from the much more painful truth, which is that they saw the signals and ignored them because ignoring them was easier than changing. And now the change has been imposed from outside rather than initiated from within. And the loss of control, the sheer humiliating loss of being forced into a reckoning they could have had voluntarily if they'd been brave enough to listen, that loss is what's really driving the earthquake inside them. I need to tell you something about what's coming next in this dynamic because the energy is very clear about the trajectory, and I think forewarning serves you. This person is going to attempt to pull you back. Not immediately. First, they'll go through the anger and the shock and the disbelief. But once those initial responses exhaust themselves, and they will, what remains is the void. The U-shaped void in their daily existence. And the void is going to be unbearable. Not because they love you, although they do in their way, because the void exposes them to themselves. Without you as a buffer, without your accommodating presence to absorb their rough edges and reflect back a manageable version of who they are, they're going to be confronted with the unfiltered version. And the unfiltered version is someone they don't particularly want to sit with, someone whose tendencies and patterns and default behaviors, when not softened by your presence, are sharper and more abrasive than they're comfortable acknowledging. The pullback attempt is going to come disguised as something reasonable. They're smart enough to know that showing up with "I need you back" would be too transparent, so they'll find a pretext. A practical matter that requires your input. An emotional appeal framed as concern for your well-being rather than theirs. A sudden, conveniently timed crisis that seems to necessitate exactly the kind of support you used to provide, or, most insidiously, an apology. Not the real apology that you deserve, the one that demonstrates genuine understanding of the dynamic and genuine willingness to restructure it. A strategic apology. The kind that says enough of the right words to create a doorway back to the old pattern without actually committing to the kind of deep, uncomfortable, identity-level change that would make the old pattern unnecessary. I'm not telling you how to respond to the pullback. That's your decision, and it should be made from the specific circumstances of your specific situation, not from a general spiritual message. But I am telling you to recognize it for what it is when it comes, to see the pretext beneath the pretext, to feel the energy behind the words and check it against the energy of the dynamic as it existed before you moved. Does this feel like genuine change or like a sophisticated version of the same old pattern? Does this apology land in your body as real or as performance? Does this person's energy feel like someone who has genuinely reckoned with their part in the dynamic, or like someone who is simply willing to say whatever is necessary to restore the arrangement that benefited them? Your body will know. Your body has always known. Your body is the one that told you it was time to move in the first place, long before your mind caught up, long before the logic of it assembled itself into a coherent argument for departure. Your body was the first to register the unsustainability, the first to send up the flare, the first to say, I cannot do this anymore, and I will begin shutting down systems if you don't listen to me. Trust your body in this. When the pullback comes, and it will come, let your body vote alongside your mind. And if your body says no, if your body clenches and contracts and signals alarm, even as your mind is being seduced by the reasonable sounding words and the carefully crafted apology, trust the body. The body doesn't lie. The body doesn't negotiate with false premises. The body simply reports what it feels, and what it feels is the truth. There is a person watching this situation from the outside, someone in your life who has been waiting quietly and without wanting to overstep for you to do exactly what you did. This person saw the dynamic. They saw the cost. They saw you shrinking inside a role that was consuming you, and they wanted to say something, probably tried to say something, but the way you defended the dynamic, the way you rationalized it, the way you transformed self-sacrifice into a virtue and made anyone who questioned it feel like they were being unsupportive, that defense system was so effective that even the people who loved you most couldn't penetrate it. They had to stand back and watch, and the watching was its own form of suffering. This person is going to reach out to you in the aftermath with an energy that is going to feel different from what you're used to receiving. Not, I told you so, although they'd be entitled to it. Something warmer. Something like, welcome back. As though you've returned from a long trip to a country where the customs were strange and the language was foreign, and the version of you that existed there was a translation of yourself rather than the original. Welcome back to your own language. Welcome back to your actual size. Welcome back to the version of you that doesn't have to fold. Now, I want to talk about something that I think is the most important dimension of everything that's happened. What this earthquake reveals about you, not about the other person, about you. Because the most significant consequence of what you did is not the disruption of someone else's life. It's the discovery of your own capacity. You found the edge of your own accommodation, the edge of your own tolerance, the edge of a patience that you and everyone around you believed was limitless. And finding the edge changes your relationship with yourself in a way that nothing else could have. You are not limitless. That is not an insult. That is a liberation. You are not an infinite resource that exists to be drawn upon without consequence. You are a finite, bounded, beautifully limited human being with a specific amount of energy and a specific amount of tolerance and a specific amount of give before the giving becomes taking from yourself. And knowing your limits, truly knowing them, not intellectually but experientially, through the lived event of reaching them and discovering what happens when you do, that knowledge is one of the most powerful things a person can possess, because it means the next time someone approaches you with an unspoken contract, that demands unlimited accommodation, you'll recognize it. You'll feel the first clause being drafted, and you'll have the option, the informed, embodied, experience-backed option to decline the contract before the ink dries. Not after years of suffering, not at the breaking point, at the beginning. That's what this earthquake gave you. Not just freedom from one dynamic, but immunity from the pattern. The template that this person used to relate to you, the template you allowed through your compliance, that template existed because you didn't know your own edge. Now you know it. You've touched it. You've stood on it and looked down and seen what lies beyond it, which is the version of you that says no, the version that is willing to disappoint someone rather than disappear yourself. That version exists now. It's been born through the earthquake, and its existence changes everything going forward, not just with this person, with everyone. There is a moment approaching, and it might already be here, where the grief and the guilt and the strange empty room feeling begin to give way to something else, something quieter, something that settles into your body like warmth returning to a limb that fell asleep. Not happiness exactly, more like recognition. The recognition of your own face in the mirror after a long time of seeing someone else's reflection there. You're going to look at yourself, literally or figuratively, and for the first time in a very long time, you're going to see you, not the accommodating version, not the folded version, not the version that makes itself small enough to fit inside someone else's expectations. You, full-sized, uncompressed, taking up exactly the amount of space you were always meant to take up. And that sight, that moment of seeing yourself clearly after a long period of distortion, is going to bring tears, not sad tears, not guilty tears. The tears of someone who has been found after being lost for so long that they'd forgotten they were missing. The tears of a reunion between you and yourself. A reunion that was only possible because you caused an earthquake, because you dared to move the ground that everyone, including you, assumed was permanent. Because you chose, in one defining moment, to be seismic. I want to say something directly to the part of you that still feels guilty. The part that lies awake wondering if you should call, if you should apologize, if you should try to repair what you dismantled. That part of you is not wrong to feel what it feels. Guilt is a signal that you care about the impact of your actions on others, and caring about your impact is a mark of emotional intelligence, not a flaw. But I want to draw a distinction that I think will help you navigate the coming days. There's a difference between guilt that is appropriate and guilt that is habitual. Appropriate guilt says, I caused harm, and I need to sit with that. Habitual guilt says, I asserted myself, and I need to undo it. The first kind of guilt is moral. The second kind is conditioning. And what I can feel in your energy is a mixture of both, with the habitual kind trying very hard to masquerade as the moral kind, because habitual guilt is sneaky. It knows that if it shows up as I should accommodate, I should fold, I should go back to being small, you'll recognize it as the old pattern and reject it. So instead, it shows up as, I hurt them, I owe them, I need to fix this, which sounds like moral responsibility, but is actually the old contract reasserting itself through a different door. Here's how you tell the difference. Moral guilt asks you to take responsibility for the harm while maintaining your boundary. Habitual guilt asks you to dissolve the boundary to relieve the discomfort. If the guilt is steering you toward accountability, toward an honest acknowledgement that your actions had impact, toward a willingness to hear this person's pain without taking ownership of their choices, that's moral guilt and it's worth following. But if the guilt is steering you back into the role back into the folding, back into the, oh God, what have I done? I need to make this right, by returning to exactly the dynamic that was killing me. That's habitual guilt, and it needs to be recognized, named, thanked for its concern, and firmly, lovingly declined. Something I want you to know, something that this message finding you through Mary's Angel Tarot at this exact moment is designed to communicate, is that the earthquake you caused is not a tragedy. It feels like one, it looks like one. The person on the receiving end is certainly narrating it as one. But from the perspective of the larger spiritual trajectory of both your lives, this earthquake is a correction. A necessary, overdue, cosmically endorsed correction of a dynamic that had deviated so far from health that subtle repair was no longer possible. The system didn't need adjustment, it needed disruption. And you, by being the one brave enough or exhausted enough or desperate enough to provide the disruption, performed an act of service that neither you nor the other person will fully appreciate for some time. Yes, I said service. Not cruelty, not selfishness. Service. Because what you did for this person, as much as it hurts them now, is the first honest feedback they've received in a very long time. You told them the truth. Not with words, with action. You told them that their behavior has consequences, that other people are real, that the compliance they've been enjoying was a gift, not a right, and the gift has been rescinded. That information, as devastating as it is to receive, is a gift in itself. It's the kind of gift that doesn't look like a gift, it looks like a catastrophe. But in the wreckage of the catastrophe are the raw materials of genuine self-awareness, and if this person has the courage to sift through the rubble with honest hands, they will find things in it that they could never have found while the structure was still standing. Things about themselves, things about the way they love and the way they take, and the way they fail to see the people closest to them. Those things were invisible as long as the dynamic was intact. Your earthquake made them visible. Whether this person chooses to look at what's been revealed is not up to you. Your job was the earthquake, their job is the archaeology, and those are two separate responsibilities that should not be confused. You don't owe them the excavation of their own ruins. You already did the hardest part. What they do with the wreckage is their work, their journey, their opportunity for the kind of growth that only becomes available when the comfortable structures of self-deception are no longer standing. I want to leave you with something that I hope settles deep enough to withstand the emotional weather of the coming days. You are not a villain in this story. You are not even an anti-hero. You are a person who reached the limit of their own endurance and responded with a clarity and a finality that surprised everyone, most of all yourself. The surprise is not evidence that what you did was wrong. It's evidence that who you were before was incomplete. The person who never pushed back, never set limits, never disrupted the comfort of others by asserting their own needs, that person was not your true self. That person was a survival adaptation. A version of you that was optimized for a world that rewarded compliance and punished authenticity. And you've outgrown that optimization. You've evolved beyond the conditions that created it. And the earthquake, the beautiful, terrible, necessary earthquake, is the sound of evolution happening in real time. The ground you shook needed shaking. The person you shocked needed shocking. And the version of you that emerged from the shaking and the shocking, the version with edges, with limits, with the capacity to say this far and no further, that version is not a diminishment. It is an arrival. You have arrived at yourself. After a long, long journey through the territory of other people's expectations, you have finally arrived at the border of your own sovereignty and stepped across it. The rubble will settle. The dust will clear. The person whose world you disrupted will either grow from the disruption or they won't, and that outcome is theirs to determine. But you, standing here in the open space of your own newly claimed territory, with the echo of the earthquake still ringing in your bones, and the strange, disorienting, exhilarating silence of a life that is finally, unequivocally yours, you are exactly where you need to be. Feel the ground beneath your feet, your ground, the ground that moved because you moved it. The ground that will never be mistaken for someone else's foundation again. It's yours. All of it. For the first time. Yours. All right. Thank you so much for watching Mary's Angel Tarot. Take care of your energy, and I'll see you in the next reading. Bye.